Right now, somewhere in the world, a grown man is crying because a ball went into a net. He's hugging strangers. His heart rate is through the roof. He's screaming at a television like it owes him money. And millions of people think this is completely normal. But you're sitting there, watching this scene unfold, feeling absolutely nothing. Maybe a slight confusion. Maybe a quiet amusement. Maybe just an overwhelming desire to be literally anywhere else. And somewhere in the back of your mind, you've wondered if something is wrong with you. If you're missing some fundamental piece of the human experience that everyone else seems to have. If you're somehow broken because you genuinely, deeply, truly do not care who wins the game. I'm going to tell you something that might change how you see yourself. You're not broken. Your brain is just playing a completely different game. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly why. Let's start with something most people never think about. Why does anyone care about sports in the first place? I mean, really think about it. You're watching strangers, people you've never met, people who don't know you exist, people who are getting paid more money in one game than you'll make in 10 years. And you're emotionally invested in whether they successfully move a ball from one place to another? On paper, this sounds insane. Yet 60% of Americans identify as sports fans. Billions of people worldwide organize their entire weekends around watching these strangers compete. They paint their faces, they buy expensive jerseys, they get into actual physical fights with other fans. They experience genuine depression when their team loses a championship. This isn't just casual interest. This is deep, primal, almost religious devotion. So what's actually happening here? The answer goes back about 200,000 years, to when your ancestors were living in small tribes on the African savanna. Back then, being part of a group wasn't a preference, it was survival. If you were alone, you died. Predators killed you, starvation killed you, the elements killed you. But if you were part of a tribe, you had protection. You had shared resources. You had people watching your back while you slept. Your brain evolved to desperately, urgently, obsessively seek group belonging. And it developed powerful chemical rewards to make sure you stayed connected to your tribe. When you feel like you belong to a group, your brain releases oxytocin. This is the same hormone that bonds mothers to their newborns. The same chemical that makes you feel love for your family. The same neurological mechanism that creates deep, lasting, human connections. And here's what's fascinating. Your brain can't really tell the difference between your actual family and a symbolic family. When a sports fan watches their team, their brain releases oxytocin as if those players were their actual relatives. As if that stadium full of strangers wearing the same colors were their actual tribe. Neurologically, sports fandom hijacks the ancient bonding systems that evolved to keep our ancestors alive. Those players aren't strangers. To the fan's brain, they're family. That team isn't just entertainment, it's their tribe. And winning isn't just exciting, it's survival. This is why fans say "we" when their team wins. We won the championship. We beat our rivals. We're going to the playoffs. They're not being arrogant or delusional. Their brain genuinely experiences the team's victory as their own victory. The same neural pathways that would fire if they personally accomplished something light up when their team succeeds. This is called basking in reflected glory, and it's one of the most powerful psychological phenomena in human behavior. But here's where things get really interesting. Not everyone's brain works this way. Some people have what psychologists call lower tribal instincts. Their identity isn't as strongly tied to group membership. They don't feel that primal pull toward collective identity. And research suggests this isn't a choice or a personality quirk. It might be neurological. A 2019 study published in the Journal of Sports Psychology examined people with low sports interest and found something remarkable. These individuals showed significantly reduced us versus them thinking across multiple domains. They were less likely to automatically view outgroups negatively, less likely to derive self-esteem from group victories, less likely to feel threatened by people who weren't part of their identified groups. This isn't about being antisocial. It's about having a fundamentally different relationship with collective identity. If you don't care about sports, your brain might simply be wired for more individualistic self-concept. Your sense of who you are doesn't depend as heavily on belonging to something larger than yourself. You don't need external tribal victories to feel valuable. Your identity is more internally generated. And while this might make Super Bowl parties feel like alien anthropology experiments, it's not a deficiency. It's just a different cognitive architecture. But the tribal bonding is only part of the story. There's another reason sports are so compelling to so many people, and it involves the most addictive molecule in your brain. Dopamine gets a lot of attention, usually in the context of social media addiction or substance abuse. But dopamine isn't actually about pleasure. It's about anticipation, about wanting, about the gap between now and something that might happen. And sports, whether intentionally designed this way or not, are essentially dopamine machines. Think about what happens during a game. Every play could be the one that changes everything. Every possession holds potential. Every moment is pregnant with possibility. Will they score? Will they miss? Will there be an upset? Your brain has no idea what's going to happen next. And this uncertainty, this constant state of potential reward, keeps dopamine flowing at elevated levels for hours. Neuroscientists call this intermittent reinforcement. It's the same principle that makes slot machines the most addictive form of gambling. It's the same mechanism that makes you check your phone 50 times a day, hoping for new notifications. The reward isn't guaranteed. It might come, it might not. And that uncertainty is precisely what makes it so neurologically compelling. Studies using functional MRI imaging have shown that watching sports activates the same reward centers as gambling and other highly engaging activities. The ventral striatum lights up. The nucleus accumbens fires. The brain of someone watching a close game looks remarkably similar to someone playing a slot machine. This isn't a metaphor. The neurological pattern is genuinely, measurably similar. And here's the kicker. Research from the University of Chicago suggests that variations in dopamine receptor genes can predict how much someone will care about competitive spectator activities. Some people have dopamine systems that fire intensely in response to vicarious competition. Others simply don't. Your complete indifference to the championship game might not be a choice or a lack of effort to care. It might be written into your genetic code. Your dopamine receptors just aren't triggered by watching other people compete. And no amount of trying to care will change your fundamental neurochemistry. But there's something else worth exploring here. Something that reveals a lot about why sports fans and non-sports fans often seem to be speaking completely different languages. For sports fans, games aren't just competitions, they're stories. Epic narratives with heroes and villains, underdogs and dynasties, tragedy and triumph. The championship run isn't just a series of athletic competitions. It's a hero's journey. The aging veteran chasing one last title. The young prodigy trying to prove the doubters wrong. The team nobody believed in defying all expectations. These storylines are deeply compelling to the human brain because we are, at our core, storytelling animals. Narrative is how we make sense of existence, and sports provide an endless supply of ready-made stories with genuine stakes, unpredictable outcomes, and emotional catharsis. For people wired to receive stories this way, sports are endlessly fascinating, not because of the athletic competition itself, but because of the human drama embedded within it. But people who don't care about sports often experience this narrative as meaningless. They look at the same game and think something like this: why would I emotionally invest in an outcome I cannot control, performed by people I have never met, in a competition that has no actual impact on my real life? They're not wrong. From a purely rational perspective, caring about sports is somewhat absurd. But neither are sports fans wrong. They're just experiencing a different relationship with narrative and meaning. And this gets at something important about the psychology of sports indifference. It's often not that non-sports people lack the capacity for passion or narrative engagement. They frequently have intense passions and deep engagement with stories. They're just finding those things somewhere else. A 2021 study in the Journal of Individual Differences found something fascinating. People with low sports interest scored significantly higher in openness to experience, one of the big 5 personality traits. They showed elevated appreciation for art, beauty, and novel ideas. They were more likely to seek meaning through creative pursuits, intellectual challenges, and aesthetic experiences. They weren't less passionate than sports fans. Their passion was simply directed toward different domains. Their brains were seeking the same fundamental rewards that sports provide: meaning, connection, emotional intensity, transcendent experience. They were just finding those rewards in music, literature, nature, ideas, personal relationships, creative projects. The destination was the same, the path was different. There's also something worth mentioning about empathy, because this is where things get counterintuitive. You might think that people who care deeply about sports would be more empathetic overall. After all, they're capable of experiencing intense emotional reactions to other people's struggles and triumphs. They cry when athletes they've never met retire. They feel genuine joy when a player they admire succeeds. Isn't that empathy? In a way, yes. Sports fandom does involve a form of emotional resonance with others, but research suggests it's a specific type of empathy with particular boundaries. Psychologists distinguish between affective empathy, which is feeling what others feel, and cognitive empathy, which is understanding what others might be thinking or experiencing. Sports fans often show high affective empathy, but specifically for in-group members. They feel deeply for players on their team, fans of their team, anyone wearing their colors. But this empathy often doesn't extend to the out-group. In fact, sports fandom is one of the few contexts where openly hating strangers is socially acceptable. You can despise fans of a rival team. You can wish failure on athletes who play for the opposition. You can feel genuine joy when your rivals suffer. This in-group, out-group empathy pattern is ancient tribal psychology playing out in a modern context. And it reveals something important about empathy allocation. Everyone has a limited capacity for caring deeply about things. Attention is finite. Emotional energy is finite. And where you direct that capacity matters. Sports fans often allocate significant empathy toward their teams and the sports world more broadly. This is a genuine form of caring, and it brings them connection, joy, and meaning. But people who don't care about sports typically allocate that same empathy differently. They might direct it toward social causes, personal relationships, creative collaborations, intellectual communities, animals, the environment, or any number of other domains. The total amount of empathy isn't necessarily different. The distribution is. I want to be clear about something before we go further. Nothing I've said so far is meant to suggest that one way of being is superior to the other. Sports fandom brings genuine benefits, community, excitement, shared experience, ritualized emotional expression, reasons to gather with friends and family. These are real goods, and dismissing them would be intellectually dishonest. At the same time, not caring about sports also brings genuine benefits. More time for other pursuits, less emotional volatility tied to outcomes you can't control. Freedom from the extensive time commitments sports fandom often requires. These are also real goods. The goal here isn't to declare a winner in some imaginary competition between sports fans and everyone else. The goal is understanding. Because the truth is, sports fans and non-sports fans often struggle to understand each other. And that mutual incomprehension comes from a failure to recognize that their brains are genuinely, measurably different in how they process tribal belonging, reward anticipation, and narrative meaning. But let me tell you about something that doesn't get discussed enough. For some people, not caring about sports isn't just neurological indifference. It's a defense mechanism with a history. Maybe you were the kid who always got picked last in gym class. Maybe you felt humiliated by your athletic inadequacy during the years when physical competence determined social status. Maybe you learned early that sports culture was a world where you didn't belong and weren't welcome. Maybe the aggressive competitiveness, the machismo, the performance of dominance that often surrounds sports fandom felt alienating or even threatening. For many people, indifference to sports began as protection, a way of saying, I don't care about your game because your game never cared about me. And over time, that protective indifference became genuine. You actually stopped caring, not as a pose or a defense, but as a real feature of your psychology. Your brain learned not to invest in something that only brought you exclusion and pain. If this is your story, there's nothing wrong with it. You're not broken or damaged. You adapted. Your psychology protected you from a source of hurt, and now that protection is just part of who you are. But it might be worth understanding that origin, not to force yourself to care about sports, that ship has sailed, but to understand your own history with the compassion you deserve. There's another group I want to address directly. The people who don't just not care about sports, but who feel actively annoyed, superior, or contemptuous toward people who do. I understand the impulse. Really, I do. When you genuinely don't see the appeal of something that dominates so much of culture, conversation, and attention, it's tempting to conclude that you must be smarter or deeper than the millions who do care. That sports fans are somehow less thoughtful, less sophisticated, less intellectual. This is understandable, but it's also a trap. First, because it's not supported by evidence. Intelligence, education, and creativity are distributed across sports fans and non-sports fans alike. Some of the most brilliant people in history have been passionate about athletics. Some have been completely indifferent. The correlation between intelligence and sports interest is essentially zero. Second, because contempt is expensive. It costs you goodwill, relationships, and the humility necessary for genuine understanding. And third, because it misses something important about human psychology. Different doesn't mean better. Your indifference to sports isn't a sign of superior depth or intelligence. It's just a sign of different wiring. And the same brain that makes you indifferent to the Super Bowl might make you obsessively interested in something that other people find equally inexplicable. Everyone has their version of sports. The thing they care intensely about that others don't understand. The domain where they're the obsessive fan and everyone else is wondering why it matters. Recognizing this tends to generate humility and connection rather than contempt and isolation. Let me share something else that's genuinely interesting about the psychology of sports indifference. People who don't obsess over sports often report something specific about their experience of time and attention. They feel more present in their own lives. Think about what sports fandom requires. Hours every week watching other people do things, following other people's stories, caring about other people's outcomes, experiencing vicarious struggle and triumph rather than direct struggle and triumph. This isn't inherently bad. Vicarious experience is a legitimate and valuable part of human life. It's why we read novels and watch movies. But there's something to be said for the alternative. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying optimal experience, what he called flow states. Those moments when you're completely absorbed in an activity, fully present, entirely engaged. Flow is where life feels most meaningful and alive. And Csikszentmihalyi found that flow could be achieved through countless activities. But here's the key insight. Flow typically comes from participation, not observation. From doing, not watching. From direct engagement, not vicarious experience. People who don't spend hours watching sports often spend those hours in activities that generate flow directly. Creating things, building things, learning things, engaging in relationships and experiences that involve active participation rather than passive observation. This isn't about judging how people spend their time. Everyone needs both active and passive engagement. Both are valuable. But there is something worth noticing here. When you don't invest large chunks of your week in watching other people's lives, you often end up investing that time in living your own. Let's talk about what psychologists call parasocial relationships. These are one-sided relationships where you feel a genuine connection to someone who doesn't know you exist. Celebrities, influencers, fictional characters, sports stars. Parasocial relationships aren't inherently unhealthy. Humans naturally form attachments to people and characters who are meaningful to them, even without reciprocity. But the balance matters. Sports fans often have extensive parasocial investments in players, coaches, and teams. They know intimate details about strangers' lives. They feel genuine emotion about strangers' successes and failures. They build a whole ecosystem of one-sided connection around people they'll never meet. People who don't care about sports tend to prefer investing emotional energy where there's actual reciprocity, where their care matters to the outcome, where they're a participant in the relationship, not just an observer. This isn't about one approach being right and the other wrong, but it does suggest different orientations toward where emotional energy is most meaningfully directed. And for some people, the shift away from vicarious parasocial investment and toward direct reciprocal investment is a major source of satisfaction and meaning in life. Their emotional lives are smaller in scope, but deeper in intimacy. Here's something I want you to sit with for a moment, if you're someone who doesn't care about sports. You've probably spent a lot of time feeling like you were on the outside of something everyone else was inside, like you were missing a piece everyone else had. Like normal human experience involved caring about games, and you somehow didn't get the programming. And I want to tell you clearly, you're not outside normal human experience. You're just having a different human experience. Your brain is optimized for different rewards. Your tribal instincts operate in different domains. Your dopamine system responds to different stimuli. Your narrative engagement works through different media. None of this is wrong. None of it is a deficiency. It's just variation. The same variation that makes human beings so adaptive and diverse. The world needs people who are obsessed with sports. It needs the passion, community, and shared experience that sports fandom creates. But it also needs people who genuinely don't care, who invest their attention and emotion and time elsewhere, who build meaning through different channels, who sit out the collective fever and maintain their own separate flame. You're not broken. You're not boring. You're not lacking passion or tribal instinct or narrative capacity. You just express these fundamental human traits differently. And in a world that often makes you feel abnormal for not caring about games, hearing that might be worth more than you realize. The next time you're at a gathering where everyone's watching the game and you're feeling that familiar alienation, that sense of being a stranger in your own culture, try to remember, your brain is running different software. That's not a bug, it's a feature. And somewhere out there, there's a gathering of people who care intensely about the things you care about. Where you'd be the one screaming at the television, and everyone else would be the confused observers. Everyone's a fan of something. What makes you different is just what you're a fan of. If this resonated with you, if you felt seen and understood, you might also want to understand why quiet people process information so differently from everyone else. Why the brain that doesn't get excited about sports might actually be your biggest competitive advantage. Click here to discover what science has learned about how deep thinkers experience the world. You might be surprised by what you find.